Hi, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we have a new life story. Let's begin.
I was 19 when I signed it. I didn't ask questions. I didn't read the document. I didn't even take a copy home. It was just a quiet Sunday afternoon in my father's study, sunlight bleeding through the blinds, dust suspended in the air like something sacred. He said it was a simple formality, something to protect the family's assets. His tone was calm, kind even. The kind of voice you use when you're petting a dog just before the vet puts it down. I remember my mother standing in the hallway, arms crossed, not looking at me. I remember my younger brother Sean laughing in the kitchen with my uncle, not knowing, or maybe knowing too much. I remember the feeling in my stomach, a tightness, not pain, just pressure. A voice I hadn't learned to trust yet. The voice that would, 15 years later, tell me you were sold that day. It started with a funeral. My grandfather, Martin Greer, passed away at 89. He was the kind of man who made you sit up straighter just by walking into a room. Banker, landowner, silent donor to half the town's conservative causes, and patriarch of the Greer family legacy, 3 generations of tightly guarded wealth tied up in farmland, stocks, and a sprawling estate in Virginia that we weren't even allowed to visit unless invited. The wake was elegant, polished, efficient. Closed casket, per his request. Sean gave the eulogy. I wasn't asked to speak. I didn't even know he died until 2 days after it happened. My father claimed it was a mix-up, said they were so overwhelmed with arrangements they forgot to call me. I lived 3 hours away, a single mother of one, working 2 jobs. Maybe they thought I wouldn't make the time, or maybe they didn't want me there at all. 2 weeks after the funeral, I got a letter from a law firm in Richmond. It was formal, cold. As a previously named party in the Greer Family Trust, you are hereby notified. What followed was 5 paragraphs of legal jargon, but the core message hit like a bat to the chest. I had been disinherited. No explanation, no personal note, just a clean removal of my name from everything: land, cash, holdings, all reassigned to Sean Greer, my younger brother by 4 years, who had until recently been failing upward through a series of well-connected finance internships my father arranged for him. I called the firm. The receptionist refused to patch me through, said they couldn't discuss privileged documentation without confirmation of identity. I sent my ID. They still refused. So I drove. 3 hours, straight through, heart pounding, palms wet. When I arrived, they let me sit in the lobby for 45 minutes before a young associate came out, looked me in the eye, and handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a single page, an amendment to the trust, signed by me, dated 15 years ago. I barely remembered the signature. The name was mine, but the hand that had written it didn't feel like me anymore. That version of myself was still learning how to apologize for taking up space, still convinced love could be earned through obedience, still afraid to say no. Back then, my father's word was law. He wasn't cruel, at least not in the ways people notice, but his control was absolute. His approval was currency. His disappointment felt like exile. So when he asked me to come into his office that Sunday afternoon and help him with something important, I didn't hesitate. He placed the paper in front of me and smiled. He said it was nothing dramatic, just a restructuring. Keeps everything clean. I remember the pen. It was heavy, gold. He had it engraved with our family motto, honor through order. I remember my hand trembling just a little, and I remember thinking, if he says it's fine, it must be fine. I drove home in silence, clutching the paper like it might catch fire. When I got back to my apartment, my daughter Emma was asleep. I sat at the kitchen table and read it again, over and over. My eyes kept finding the same phrases. Hereby waives all future claims, recognizes full transfer of interest, trust reallocation under authority of guardian. Guardian. I was 19, legally an adult, but the document was filed with a clause referencing emotional maturity. It stated that I had voluntarily relinquished succession rights in favor of the male heir, Sean Greer. No mention of compensation, no date of expiration, no condition for reversal. It was airtight, and it was designed that way. I didn't call my father right away. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive to his house and bang on the door until he came out. I wanted to drag him into the daylight and force him to admit what he had done. But instead, I called a lawyer. Her name was Adriana Wells, sharp, dry, and utterly unshakable. I had met her through a friend during my custody battle with Emma's father. She read the document twice. Then she looked at me and asked the question I was afraid to answer. Do you want revenge or do you want justice? I stared at her. And for the first time in my life, I said the truth out loud. Both.
The thing about people like my father is they don't expect you to fight. Not really. They build their lives on obedience, on silence, on daughters who flinch when spoken to in sharp tones, and sons who inherit the weight of the family name like it's their birthright. They don't expect someone to circle back after 15 years with a lawyer and a copy of their own handwriting. But that's exactly what I did. Adriana didn't waste time. She started by researching the law firm my father used to file the amendment. The original trust had been handled by McAllister and Darnell, one of those generational white shoe firms that make old Southern money feel even older. But the amendment, the one I signed, had been filed quietly, almost separately, by a junior attorney who no longer worked there. A red flag. Then came the timeline. The amendment was dated just 5 months before my grandfather was diagnosed with cognitive decline, meaning my father had moved early knowing what was coming, knowing Grandpa wouldn't be able to revise the trust later if anything went wrong, knowing Sean would walk into an empire unchallenged. It wasn't just betrayal, it was strategy. And I was the pawn they assumed would never know the rules. I didn't tell Sean I knew. Not yet. I needed to see him, hear him. I hadn't spoken to him in over a year. Our lives barely crossed. But now, looking at that paper, I saw his name where mine should have been, printed over and over again. So I messaged him. Just one line. Can we talk about Grandpa's trust? He replied 10 minutes later. Sure. Want to come by the house? His house. The one he bought last year. 5 bedrooms, pool, landscaped front, paid in cash according to county records. Paid with my bloodline. When I walked into his foyer, I noticed the details. Family portraits, none of me. Books on theology, economics, legacy planning. A photo of him shaking hands with a state senator. The kind of curated environment you create when you know the world is watching. He offered me a drink. I said no. We sat across from each other in a pristine sitting room that felt like a showroom. So, he said, smiling politely, you got the letter. I didn't answer. He leaned back, completely at ease. Dad told me you might make some noise. Noise. That's what he called my grief, my rage, my lost future. Why? I asked. Why did you go along with it? His smile faltered, just a flicker. Because it made sense. You weren't interested in the family business. You moved out, got pregnant, chose a different path. I was 19. And I was 15, but I listened, I studied, I stayed close. I laughed, but it came out hollow. Dad told you to say that, didn't he? He didn't deny it. I stood up. This isn't over. Sean looked up at me with something almost resembling pity. You signed it. We didn't forge anything. He was right legally, but legality and justice are rarely the same thing. Back at home, Adriana had dug up something. The notary listed on the document, the one who'd supposedly verified my signature, was fake. Not only had the woman never notarized that document, but she'd filed a complaint years ago when she discovered her seal had been used on multiple estate papers she'd never seen. Quietly settled, buried. Adriana smiled when she showed me the printout. We've got leverage. What followed was a flurry of paperwork, subpoenas, calls, and silence. The good kind. The silence that makes rich men nervous. We filed a preliminary motion to challenge the trust amendment under fraud, duress, and improper witness verification. It was risky. Time had passed, memory faded, but the legal basis was solid enough to rattle them. Then came the call from my father. I hadn't spoken to him directly since the funeral. He didn't say hello. Just, is this how you want to be remembered? I waited. He continued, dragging the family name through court? For what? A few million you never earned? It's not about the money. He scoffed. Of course it is. Everything is. Then he dropped the line I didn't expect. She never wanted you to have it. It stopped me cold. What? Your grandfather's wishes were clear, but so were hers, your grandmother. She saw the path you were on. She asked us to protect the family, to make sure the legacy stayed in capable hands. She died when I was 17. And by 19, you'd already proven what kind of woman you were becoming. There it was. The judgment, the quiet misogyny, the belief that motherhood disqualified me, that independence was defiance, that the only heirs worth honoring were the ones who played by his rules. But I wasn't playing anymore. I said quietly, you made a mistake. You taught me how to obey, but you also taught me how to wait. He hung up. That night, I sat with Emma. She was drawing on the floor, humming, hair in a messy bun, markers all over the carpet. She looked up at me and said, "Are you okay?" I smiled. I'm finally getting there. Because for the first time in 15 years, I wasn't afraid of my father. I wasn't afraid of the Greer name. And I wasn't 19 anymore. I was ready.
You know a man is afraid when he suddenly remembers how to be polite. 2 days after our petition was officially filed in probate court, my father's attorney reached out with a proposal. Not a settlement, not yet, but a meeting. An attempt to resolve the matter privately before unnecessary harm is done to the family name. The arrogance dripped from every word. I met Adriana in the parking garage before we walked into their office. She wore navy as always, her hair twisted into that tight coil she only used for war. She handed me a slim black binder, no label, just a single sticky note on the front. Read only if they tried to play noble. Inside was everything they didn't expect I'd find. The meeting was at Peterson and Bright, a firm my father had used since the 90s. Conference room 12, floor-to-ceiling windows, old money bookshelves that no one had ever read. On one side of the table, my father, Sean, and 2 attorneys in expensive ties. On ours, me, Adriana, and a folder thicker than the Bible they used to beat me into silence. My father stood when I entered. He looked thinner, paler, or maybe that was just the guilt, finally catching up. "Elizabeth," he said, "you look well." I sat, didn't answer. Sean didn't look at me. His jaw was tight, like he was still trying to convince himself I'd just go away if he stayed quiet long enough. One of the lawyers began with rehearsed calm. We're hoping to avoid protracted litigation, especially given the sensitive nature of the family dynamics. Our clients are prepared to offer a goodwill gesture. Adriana cut him off. You mean hush money? He blinked. My father cleared his throat. You've made your point, but Elizabeth, this escalation, it's not you. And that's when I opened the binder. Page 1, an internal memo from a former legal associate detailing improper trust handling. Page 2, a notarization complaint buried in a private arbitration file linked to the same notary used in my amendment. Page 3, a timeline showing Sean's suspicious financial transactions, large purchases, tax shelters, gifts to shell charities run by my uncle's golf buddies. And then came page 4, a handwritten letter from my grandmother. It had taken weeks for Adriana's team to find it. It wasn't in any will, not even part of the estate paperwork. It had been tucked away in an old personal safety deposit box under my grandmother's name. A scanned copy, verified handwriting, not legally binding, but damning in context. If Martin and Charles try to cut her out, they'll do it quietly. They'll tell her it's for the good of the family. But it's a lie. She is smarter than Sean, stronger, and more moral. She reminds me of myself before I became afraid. I want her to have it all. My grandmother had written those words 2 months before her death. My father never mentioned it. No one ever did. Until now. For the first time in my life, I watched my father squirm. He didn't speak, didn't argue, just stared at the paper as if it were cursed. Adriana leaned forward. This isn't a request, she said. It's notice. If you choose to settle now, we go quiet. If not, we subpoena your financials. All of them. Retroactive 10 years. We depose Sean. We open the sealed arbitration your firm forgot to bury properly. We leak the letter. Do you think the press won't be interested? A disinherited daughter, a fake notary, a patriarch who claimed moral superiority while funneling assets into real estate for his son. The room fell silent. Then Sean spoke. Why are you doing this? The words weren't angry. They were small, desperate. I looked at him. Because I stopped being afraid of you. He flinched. Adriana stood. You have 72 hours to respond. We left. By the next morning, they had lawyers calling from 3 different offices. One of them begged us to consider mediation. Another tried to push a counteroffer that was laughable, 2% of the estate value in exchange for a permanent NDA. We didn't reply. Instead, Adriana filed a second motion, one that would open a full audit of the trust transfers and challenge their tax compliance. That same night, Sean called me. He didn't leave a voicemail, just called 3 times in a row. I didn't answer. Then a text came through. You're ruining Dad. I stared at it for a long time. Typed 1 sentence. No, he did that himself. A week later, the court issued discovery approvals. That meant we were officially in motion. We gained access to old communications, emails, financial files, internal memos, all the things people assume will stay buried forever. And buried deep inside one of the PDF archives was something Adriana flagged immediately. A scanned internal email from Sean to my father sent 5 years after the amendment with the subject line, "We should have just paid her off when she got pregnant." It took my breath away, because in that single sentence was the entire truth. They never saw me as family, only as a problem to manage. And now I was the one pulling the strings. When a powerful family begins to crack, the fractures are never clean. They ripple outward, First through the silence, then through the whispers, and finally through the headlines. It started small, a blog post, an anonymous Reddit thread with too many details to be a coincidence. Then, someone from my high school messaged me, asking if I was the daughter everyone was talking about in that real estate scandal piece. Then the press calls began. Not mainstream yet, not CNN, but regional papers, legal gossip blogs. A podcast focused on trust fraud and estate abuse requested an interview. Adriana said, "Let them dig, just not too fast." Because we knew what we were sitting on wasn't just inheritance, it was a blueprint of generational manipulation, and we were about to flip it. The Greer Family Foundation was the public face of our name, a pristine, charitable shell used to host fundraisers, galas, and tax deductions. My grandfather had started it for philanthropic outreach. My father had turned it into a PR shield. And Sean? He made it his personal portfolio. We uncovered payments labeled as donations to institutions where Sean conveniently held honorary board positions. Six-figure transfers to research centers that never published research. And luxury conference trips to resorts in Aspen and Dubai. It was all legal on paper. But optics matter. Especially when someone leaks the numbers. And someone did. Not me, not Adriana, but someone inside. It started with an envelope, no return address, delivered to my apartment door at 6 a.m. Inside, a USB drive and a note. "You're not the only one they buried. I kept the files. Make them bleed." The USB held copies of internal memos, expense reports, emails between Sean and the accountant, dozens of documents proving that they didn't just edge me out of the family trust. They rewrote the structure entirely, post-signature, using a shadow LLC as a holding mechanism. My father had moved the assets before the will was read. He was so confident I'd never fight back, he didn't even bother hiding the trail. Adriana nearly laughed when she opened the files. "You just got your smoking gun!" We filed an emergency motion the next morning. 2 days later, the Richmond Daily Herald ran a headline. "Family fortune? Legal fraud? The Greer Trust scandal spills into court." My father didn't call. My mother did. She hadn't spoken to me in almost 2 years. I picked up, curious. Her voice was strained. "You need to stop this, Elizabeth." "No hello? This is getting out of hand. I'm sorry, did someone leak our sins into the public eye? I must have missed the memo." She sighed. "I know you feel hurt." "Don't," I cut her off. "Don't use that tone, the one that sounds like concern but is really about control." A pause. Then she snapped, quieter than a whisper. "This isn't about justice. It's revenge." I smiled. "Finally, you admit it's personal." Then I hung up. The public pressure worked. Within a week, Sean's company lost a major investment deal. Donors began pulling out of the foundation's next gala. Rumors circled that my father's private club was considering a vote of reconsideration. Their kingdom was rotting, and I hadn't even gone to trial yet. That's when they played dirty. I got a letter from Child Protective Services. An anonymous tip had been submitted alleging that I was mentally unstable and emotionally abusive to my daughter. They claimed I had obsessive revenge behaviors and created a hostile home. I knew exactly who sent it. Adriana immediately called her firm's media contact and told them to prepare a statement. We compiled character letters, school records, therapy evaluations, and even had Emma's pediatrician speak directly to the assigned social worker. It was closed within 48 hours. But I didn't forget, because now I knew they would go for my daughter to stop me. That night, I opened my old family albums. Photos of birthdays, Christmases, graduations I barely remembered. Images of me smiling, standing beside the people who were now trying to destroy me. I took a photo of one picture, me, age 7, sitting on my father's lap while he reads a leather-bound Bible. I posted it. Caption: "The man in this photo taught me to obey. The woman I've become taught him I don't anymore. The fight isn't over." It went viral. 12,000 shares in 2 days. The comments split, some supportive, some accusing, but the story caught fire. People wanted more. I wasn't just the black sheep anymore. I was a storm. By the time the next court date arrived, we had enough to pursue not just restitution, but punitive damages. Adriana whispered, walking into the courthouse, "If this plays out, you don't just get your inheritance back, you take down their name." And I realized I no longer wanted the money. I wanted the silence broken. I wanted the lies burned. And I wanted every daughter who'd ever been erased to know, you can rewrite the story. Courtrooms have a smell, not of justice, but of nerves and dust and recycled air that's been breathed too many times by too many people praying to be believed. I sat at the plaintiff's table in a navy suit borrowed from Adriana's assistant. My palms were dry, my face unreadable, and for the first time in over a decade, my father couldn't look me in the eye. Sean was there too, jaw tight, suit impeccable, ego cracked, but still intact. Opposite us sat their defense team. 4 lawyers, all men, all expressionless, like statues meant to guard legacy instead of truth. But I had more than truth now. I had proof. And I had a witness. Her name was Carolyn Pierce, my father's former secretary. She'd worked for him for 23 years. I remembered her vaguely. Quiet, neat, the kind of woman who always smelled like clean paper. Adriana had tracked her down through an old HR log. She now lived in a small retirement town outside Roanoke and had been very interested to hear that the trust amendment was under legal challenge. When Adriana asked her what she remembered, she said, "Your father made a copy of Elizabeth's signature from an old field trip form and kept it in his drawer for months. Said he'd use it if she ever made the wrong choices." That testimony, under oath, was devastating. Carolyn was poised, calm. She didn't ramble, just told the court what she'd seen and what she'd chosen not to say for years out of fear. But fear, she said, didn't last as long as guilt. The defense tried to poke holes, said she was misremembering, that no such drawer existed, that she was confused about the timeline. But we had more. A scanned email between my father and a now-deceased legal clerk referring to making the signature fit and ensuring the daughter doesn't become a problem. The judge requested a recess. My father looked like he'd aged 20 years in a week. That night, Sean showed up at my apartment. I opened the door with the chain still on. He looked tired, hollow. "Can we talk?" he asked. "No, not without my lawyer." He exhaled. "Dad's falling apart." So did I. At 19, alone, pregnant, cut off. That wasn't my call. You took the money. He didn't deny it. I started to close the door. Then he blurted, "What do you want?" I stopped, looked him dead in the eye. "I want you to feel what it's like to be erased." Then I shut the door. The court reconvened 3 days later. Adriana laid out everything: the fraudulent notary signature, the asset reallocation through shell foundations, the internal email trail, the USB files, the letter from my grandmother, the forged timeline, and now the witness testimony from Carolyn. By the time she finished, the courtroom was silent. Even the judge took a moment before speaking. Then he said, "This court recognizes a pattern of deception, coercion, and misappropriation that extends beyond simple dispute. The amendment is void." My name was reinstated. The assets were frozen pending redistribution. And then came the blow I didn't expect. The judge referred the case to federal review for tax fraud. My father's face broke right there. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I didn't speak, not yet, but I stood tall. For every girl told to sign what she didn't understand, for every daughter made to feel small for being born second, for every voice that was silenced in the name of honor, I became the storm. That night, Emma asked if I was okay. I knelt beside her and said, "I'm more than okay. I'm free." I didn't take all the money. That surprises people when I tell them. They expect blood, fire, salt on the earth. But in the end, revenge doesn't always mean claiming everything. Sometimes it means letting go of what they thought defined you and watching them fall apart trying to keep it for themselves. The court awarded me 72% of the estate. Sean kept a small slice, enough to live on, but not enough to rebuild what he'd lost. The family name, the Greer legacy, became a scandalous footnote in probate law textbooks. Their charitable foundation folded within months. Half their business partners fled before the ink on the ruling had dried. And my father? He was indicted for tax fraud. He pled not guilty, of course, dragged it out, but the evidence was overwhelming. Misfiled assets, hidden donations, a forged signature trail that tied directly back to him. He was offered a deal: reduced sentence in exchange for full cooperation and a public admission of guilt. He refused. He couldn't admit he'd been wrong, couldn't admit that his daughter outplayed him. He died 6 months later of a stroke, alone, in a private care facility. No obituary. At the funeral, I didn't speak. Sean did. The words were polite, measured, hollow, like the estate, like the years of staged family photos and silent dinners. My mother didn't show. She sent a card, not to me, to the court, a letter saying she was relieved the process had ended and wished her children would stop hurting each other. I never heard from her again. I bought a house outside Asheville. Not a mansion, not an estate, just a clean, warm home with old wood floors, morning light, and space for Emma to grow without shame. I kept the trust intact, but redirected much of it into a foundation of my own, named after my grandmother, the Rose Greer Women's Justice Fund. First initiative, legal aid for disinherited daughters. Second, a scholarship for single mothers fighting financial abuse. Third, public storytelling grants. Because power comes not from what you own, but what you share. 1 year later, I got a message. It was from a young woman in Nebraska. Her father had tricked her into signing over land that belonged to her mother.
She'd read my case in a legal blog. She asked if I could help her find a lawyer. I replied within 10 minutes, connected her with Adriana, told her, "You are not alone. You're just getting started." And then I spoke. I went on a podcast, wrote an article, let them photograph me in my living room holding the document I signed at 19 and the one that voided it at 34. The title of the article was, "She Signed Away Her Inheritance at 19. 15 years later, she took back her voice." It went viral. Emma asked why people cared so much. I told her, because silence is contagious, but so is courage. She nodded, then went back to coloring. And I realized I wasn't fighting for money. I was fighting for her future to never look like my past. To every daughter told to sit down, be quiet, and smile for the photo, I see you. I was you. And you don't owe anyone your silence, not even your family.